conference. So yes, as you said, I'm going to speak about the unifying notion of topos as it was conceived by Grothendieck, who introduced it, and as it was regarded by the mathematical community in the years that followed its introduction up to the present situation. So I would like to start with this beautiful quote about the notion of topos from Récolte Semaille, which enlightens its unifying nature. So Grothendieck says, this is of course an English translation, and I definitely recommend reading the original, which is even more striking in French. In fact, Récolte Semaille has recently been published in France by Gallimard. So it is easily available nowadays. So Grothendieck says that it is the topos theme, which is this bed or deep river where come to be married geometry and algebra, topology and arithmetic, mathematical logic and category theory, the world of the continuous and that of discontinuous or discrete structures. Then he adds, it is what I have conceived of most broad to perceive with fineness by the same language, richer geometric resonances, an essence which is common to situations most distant from each other, coming from one region or another of the vast universe of mathematical things. This is very beautiful. And it's very significant because it states something which is a crucial aspect of toposes, the ability of capturing an essence of mathematical situations of possibly very different kind. We will elaborate on this, and I will also explain how one can make this aspiration about the unifying power of toposes, which is expressed by Grothendieck in particular in this quote, how we can make this into a precise mathematical theory, which not only allows to associate toposes with different kinds of situations in a meaningful way, but it also provides tools for making transfers of information, transfers of knowledge. It can be notions, theorems, definitions, whatever, from one theory to another. Before going to these more recent developments, I will talk about the reception of toposes by the mathematical community, as it was already described by Grothendieck in Récolte Semaille. And I will take some time to comment on the sociological aspects concerning the controversial reception of toposes as it was denounced by Grothendieck, because I think that it's very interesting to ponder on these aspects as well, because sociology impacts the development of mathematics. So if some developments have not been pursued, it makes sense to look for the psychological and sociological reasons behind all of this. And in fact, Grothendieck himself provided very deep reflections on all of this in Récolte Semaille. So I will not spend a lot of time on all of this, but I will be content just to quote some sentences that are particularly significant in that respect from Récolte Semaille. Okay, so what's the precise plan of the talk? So I will first review the different perspectives that one can have on the notion of topos nowadays, starting from the original conception, which was the one by Grothendieck, of a topos as a kind of generalized space, where one could still reason by using a geometrical intuition, and starting from which one could also notably define cohomology theories answering particular needs. Then I will go into the second part of the talk, where I will talk about these controversial aspects related to the reception of toposes in the mathematical community. All of this makes sense also given the fact that some of these resistances have by now been overcome, but still in some circles this kind of attitudes persist, so it makes all the more sense to talk about it. Then I will move to the more recent perspectives provided by a new view of toposes as bridges for connecting different mathematical contexts with each other. So the idea of bridge is not present in Grothendieck's work, but what I think is that this theory is actually perfectly in line with his own conception of toposes, and I will try to illustrate this during the talk. And then finally, I will sketch some future perspectives arising from this approach, as well as from work that other people have recently done with toposes. Okay, so let's start with the basic facts about toposes and how they can be viewed. In fact, already from the different approaches that one can take towards the notion of topos, one can realize about the richness of this concept. In fact, it is really a multifaceted notion, which can be regarded from quite a different perspectives. So a topos can be seen as a generalized space, as we shall explain in a minute, but it can also be regarded as a mathematical universe in which one can develop mathematics similarly as one is used to do in the classical set theoretic convention, with one important exception, which is that one should always argue constructively, that is by using just the principles of intuitionistic logic. So avoiding things such as the law of exclusive or the axiom. Then there is a third point of view, which is even deeper than the others, or at least is particularly significant in relation to the goal of using toposes as unifying spaces. And this is the point of view of classifying toposes, which allows us to regard a Grothendieck topos as a theory considered up to a notion of equivalence of theories, which is called Morita equivalence. So in fact, Morita equivalence is the relation which identifies two theories when they have the same classifying topos. And as we shall see later in the talk, actually having the same classifying topos, broadly speaking, means that the two theories describe the same mathematical content in different languages, in different ways. These ways, of course, can be logical, but also geometric or whatever kind. Because in fact, the toposes can be built starting from theories, which are logical objects, or from sites, which are geometric objects, or also from other kinds of entities coming from different areas of mathematics. So as I anticipated, after reviewing these three classical perspectives, we shall move to a presentation of the more recent developments related to the conception of toposes, because this is what actually indicates the intuition of Grothendieck about the unifying nature of toposes, not just as a philosophical remark, but as something on the basis of which one can build a whole theory, providing effective tools for realizing transfers of knowledge across different contexts. Okay, so what can we say about the first conception? Well, in fact, the original motivation that led Grothendieck to the introduction of the notion of topos was to enlarge the context of applicability of geometrical or topological methods with the aim of eventually defining cohomology theories that could be adapted to solve the Bales conjectures. So in fact, this precisely happened because Grothendieck was able to define étale cohomology by using particular toposes, which are not toposes attached to topological space, but something more general. So his program was fully successful. But it would be a mistake to think that toposes are just useful for cohomology, because in fact, as Grothendieck realized himself, the notion of topos is really a great generalization, a great extension of the notion of topological space. In fact, this is witnessed by the fact that one can understand many important properties of topological spaces through the study of the associated categories of shifts of sets on those spaces. So in particular, it is possible to understand whether a space is, say, compact or connected just by looking at the corresponding category of shifts of sets. Now, this might seem like an uninteresting remark because after all, one might say, but why should we consider categories of shifts on a space rather than a space itself? After all, a space is something very simple to manipulate. We just have points and open sets. Why should we be encumbered by a sophisticated object such as a category of shifts? Well, in fact, there are many reasons for doing this. First of all, cohomology is naturally defined from categories possessing a rich categorical structure, such as categories of shifts. While you see a topological space by itself is something that is very poor in terms of internal structure. And another reason for considering categories of shifts is that they can be defined not just in the context of topological spaces, but whenever one has a category endowed with a notion of covering family of arrows in it, what Grothendieck called a Grothendieck topology. So whenever one has a pair consisting of a category and a Grothendieck topology on it, one can define shifts on this pair. And the category that one gets in this way satisfies formal properties that are quite similar to the formal properties satisfied by categories of shifts on topological space. So the categories built in this way are what Grothendieck called a topos. So by definition, a topos is any category that can be represented as the category of shifts on a small site. So a site is by definition a pair consisting of a category and a Grothendieck topology. We say that the site is small when the underlying category is a small category that is consists just of a set of objects and arrows. Okay, so this is the original point of view, which we can qualify as a geometric point of view on toposes. And then a decade later emerged another very important, completely different point of view on toposes following the work by Olivia and Tierney. So in fact, they decided to undertake an axiomatic investigation of Grothendieck toposes as places where one could do mathematics, as a kind of alternative foundations for mathematics. And in fact, they realized that it is indeed possible to regard, because of the very rich categorical structure that any Grothendieck topos has, it is possible to regard it as a mathematical universe in which one can really perform all the usual constructions that one is familiar with in the context of society theory. With the only important exception, which I had already mentioned, that one should limit oneself to constructive arguments. Now, this point of view on toposes as mathematical universes is very important for several reasons. First of all, the generality of the notion of topos. We have seen that one can build toposes whenever one has a site. And as you can imagine, sites can be found in any area of mathematics, because you just need a category and a Grothendieck topology. So, I mean, this means that you can build indeed the toposes starting from a great variety of different mathematical situations. So the notion is very general and much, much more general than topology itself. You see, so passing from topological spaces to sites is a huge generalization. So it goes from topology to essentially the wall of mathematics. So the notion is very general, and actually we can exploit the flexibility provided by this generality to construct particular mathematical words with special properties that we might want to realize. And moreover, we can consider models of any kind of mathematical theory, in particular models of first order theories, which are the main focus of model theory, in a topos, in any Grothendieck topos. And this is extremely important because it allows one to relativize mathematics, in the sense that you no longer have just a single universe at the disposal, but you can change the universe according to your needs. And in particular, you can look for, in some sense, privileged points of view on the problem you want to investigate, and choose the toposes which embody those points of view. This will make your study of the given problem more symmetric, more natural, and then you can try to understand what you have done, for instance, by working in that particular special universe, in terms of other universes, including the classical set-based universe. So you see, whenever you can apply relativity techniques, as well illustrated by the great results obtained by Grothendieck in algebraic geometry, you see Grothendieck was the pioneer of relativity techniques in mathematics. So, and here we can extend this relativity method from schemes, which was the original context in which Grothendieck employed those techniques, to toposes, which are technically more flexible than schemes, because the notion of morphism of toposes is less rigid than the notion of morphism of schemes. So this means that the relativity techniques for toposes can be even more powerful than what can be done for schemes. And indeed, Grothendieck wanted to eventually recast the whole theory of schemes in terms of ringed toposes, etc. And in fact, before he left the mathematical community, his student Monica Kim wrote a book about this entitled Topos annelés et schéma relatif. And the idea was really to go in that direction. So finally, let's talk about classifying toposes, because in fact, this perspective was also envisaged by Grothendieck himself through the work of his student. So in fact, the PhD thesis of Monica Kim not only proposes to study schemes through ringed toposes, but it also introduces this point of view, this novel point of view on Grothendieck toposes, as classifying spaces for structures of a certain kind. In particular, so the idea is the Yoneda paradigm, that of understanding an object in a category from the arrows going to that object in the category. category. So in this case, you understand a topos by describing the morphisms to that topos from arbitrary toposes. So if you apply this, for instance, in the case of the Zariski topos, you realize that you can describe the morphisms to the Zariski topos in terms of some structures that can be expressed within first order logic. These are the local rings. And so one says that the Zariski topos classifies local rings. And similarly, we have analogous characterizations for other toposes that were useful in algebraic geometry, the étale topos, the crystalline topos, etc. So all of them can be described as the classifying toposes of certain theories that can be formulated within first order logic. Now, the kind of logic that is involved in this was not described in detail by Grothendieck. So if you take SGA4, there is a passage about this. So he simply refers to those structures as those that can be expressed in terms of finite projective limits and arbitrary inductive limits. And then he says, rather than entering the uninviting task of giving a precise meaning to this statement and of justifying it formally, we advise the reader to make it explicit and to get convinced of its validity for species of structures such as that of group, ring, module over a ring, comodule over a ring, bialgebra over a ring, torsor for a group. So in fact, Grothendieck was not particularly keen on first order logic. That is clear because he qualifies this as an uninviting task. But it's clear that he knows what he's talking about because indeed, I mean, the logic that then was identified, which is now called geometric logic, corresponds precisely to the intuition that he had expressed, that of being able to describe the structures under consideration just in terms of finite projective limits and arbitrary inductive limits. So in fact, the elucidation of geometric logic was an outcome of the work of several people, most importantly, the Montreal School of Categorical Logic, which was active in the 70s. So Mackay, Reyes, and Joyal. So they proved a very important result, stating that to any geometric first order theory, one can canonically associate a topos which classifies its models in any topos. And not only they proved the existence of such a topos, but they showed that it could be built explicitly by taking the category of sheets on a so-called syntactic site for the theory, which is a site containing a kind of tautological model of a theory, similar to what you have in propositional logic with the Lindenbaum-Tarski algebra of your theory. In fact, it is a first order generalization. So they proved this result, and so the universal property characterizing this object is the one stating that the geometric morphisms from any topos E, the classifying topos, are naturally equivalent to the models of the theory inside the topos. And this holds naturally in the topos, which means that if I change the topos, I should have a commutative square. Okay, so of course, different theories can in principle have equivalent classifying toposes. So one is led to the notion of Morita equivalence, which is the relation which identifies two theories when they have the same classifying topos, which can actually be seen as a kind of semantical core of the theory, because you see, as this picture illustrates it, the classifying topos, which is depicted here in yellow, contains by Ionida a particular model of the theory, which is called U, which in fact generates all the other models of the theory in different toposes. So you see the different toposes where you can find models are depicted here with these shapes. The green shape will represent one topos, the red shape another topos, the violet shape another. And you see that whatever model you consider inside these toposes, so in the green topos we have model M, in the red one we have a model N, in the violet one a model P. So all of these models can all be obtained as deformations of the universal model U. Namely, I can obtain all of them by applying structure preserving functors, you see F upper star, G upper star, H upper star, to this universal model. So you see this picture shows that indeed the classifying topos is somehow a center of symmetry for the theory, because it is the privileged point of view that one can have on the theory, because whatever happens elsewhere is just a deformation of what happens inside this semantical core. Okay, so the assignment from a theory to a classifying topos, as we have said, is far from being injective, because we can have very different theories, even belonging to different areas of mathematics. This is one crucial point on which we shall build with the theory of bridges. So we don't have injectivity, but we have subjectivity in the sense, essential subjectivity in the sense that every Grothendieck topos can be seen as the classifying topos of some theory. Of course, not necessarily a unique theory. In general, a topos will be classified by infinitely many theories. There is no topos which is classified by a single theory. There is always infinitely many theories classified by a given topos. In fact, whenever you present a topos by means of a site, you can attach a theory to that site so that the classifying topos of that theory coincides with the topos of sheets on the site. So in fact, already you understand that talking about sites or talking about theories as axiomatized within geometric logic is more or less equivalent, in the sense that they both represent ways for presenting toposes. So in fact, the fundamental distinction that one has to make is between the toposes, which are the objects where the unification takes place, because these are the objects where the invariants are naturally defined, in particular the cohomological invariants are naturally defined at that level. And we have the level of contingency, the level of concreteness, which is represented by theories or sites for presenting toposes. So in fact, the theory of bridges is precisely based on the interplay between these different levels, which cannot be identified with each other, because each of them represents something different. One represents universality, the other one represents multiplicity, diversity, and contingency. So it would be a big mistake to identify the two levels. It's very important to integrate the two levels without collapsing them one to the other. But to conclude this presentation of the point of view of toposes as classifiers of geometric theories, we can conclude that a Grothendieck topos can be seen as a canonical representative of equivalence classes of theories modulo Morita equivalence. So this concludes our review of the three main perspectives on the notion of topos. Now, I would like to enter the second part of the talk, which is about the reception of the notion of topos from the mathematical community. So, very sadly, the notion of topos, in spite of its richness and power, received quite a negative treatment. First of all, from people quite near Grothendieck, in particular some of his former students, and Grothendieck complains a lot about all of this in Récolte des Semailles. In fact, one can say that it's even one of the main themes of that work, because of course it was very upset by all of this. He couldn't actually understand why this notion was neglected and was even subject to a kind of derision. As you can see here, you see, to tell the truth, it was my very name over the years, which insidiously, mysteriously had become an object of derision. As a synonym for muddy, endless spooling, such as those on those famous toposes, indeed, or these motifs which fought back the years and which nobody had ever seen, of air cutting forth to the length of 1,000 pages, and of bloated and gigantic chatter on things which, in any case, anyone has always known and without having expected them. So you see, it's very it's very serious kind of accusations, and he explicitly talk about a condescending disdain. Of course, toposes are not the only objects that were subject to this kind of treatments. He also refers to motifs which were rehabilitated much sooner than toposes, for which remains a kind of resistance. But I mean, he was really quite upset by the fact that in spite of the use of the technical tools, in particular ethyl homology, which were in the end a byproduct of the topos theoretic vision, the vision itself was neglected. So you see there are other sentences, other very bitter sentences about this. So it says, the fruitful unifying idea and the powerful tool of discovery, which is the notion of topos, is maintained by a certain circle banished from the notions deemed to be secret. And then, given the disdain with which some of my former students have taken pleasure in treating this crucial unifying notion, the latter has been condemned since my departure to a marginal existence. Toposes are nevertheless encountered at every step in geometry, but we can of course very well do without seeing them, as people have avoided for millennia to see groups of symmetries, sets, or the numbers. In fact, this last remark is particularly interesting because it illustrates the link between toposes and imaginary objects in the sense of model theory, you see? So we shall come back to that later. But in any case, you see that it's very lucid, but at the same time, very bitter about the treatment that toposes has received. And in particular, in fact, he makes a distinction between the reception of the technical tools that the toposes have made available, most notably ethyl homology, which have been adopted, and Grothendieck says even appropriated by some of his former collaborators, and the vision, the global vision of toposes that, in fact, was at the origin of those technical developments. So this, I think, is very, very interesting from a sociological point of view. Like, I mean, this sentence, the operation ethyl homology consisting in discrediting the unifying vision of toposes, such as nonsense, spooling, etc. And on the other hand, to appropriate the tool, that is the paternity of the ideas, techniques, and results that I have developed on the theme of ethyl homology. So basically, Grothendieck denounces the pragmatism, which, and not only, well, but you see, ideologically, what has happened is this rejection of the vision, but an appropriation of the tools. So somehow there is this very pragmatic attitude, which is behind all of this. Namely, we should just use what is necessary and not to look for anything else. All these abstract developments, in the end, they are useless, etc., etc. So if you take some text by Deligne, you will see sentences that are quite denigratory with respect to the general vision. Of course, Grothendieck was fully convinced about the importance of developing things at the greatest level of the greatest natural level of generality, and the importance of working in a very systematic spirit, trying to cover large territories so that in the end the difficulty of a problem would be solved as a fruit that opens up, you see, when is put in a liquid, etc. So you see, he makes this comparison to illustrate his own approach to mathematics, which is not a kind of competitive, sporty approach, but it is a long-term systematic approach. And certainly his former students didn't quite share this attitude, resulting in what Grothendieck condensed here in Recoltes Semai. There is also another interesting development of toposes on the logical side, which is almost completely independent from that of the geometry, and which involves the notion of elementary topos. In fact, Grothendieck was not too much aware of these developments, because when Olivia and Tierney introduced the notion of elementary topos, Grothendieck was already towards the end of his like public mathematical career. So there are not many comments about this, but it's interesting also to analyze what happened on this logical side, because in fact, after the, as I said earlier, Olivia and Tierney undertook an axiomatic study of Grothendieck toposes, and this led them to introduce a notion which is now called elementary topos, which in fact is more general than the notion of Grothendieck topos, but lacks some of the crucial features of Grothendieck toposes, such as the existence of arbitrary colimits, which actually makes it possible to do topology. You see, because if you want to do topology, you need to be able to perform infinitary constructions, like taking arbitrary, not necessarily finite sets of open sets, you see. And this you cannot do in a elementary topos. And another crucial feature of Grothendieck toposes is the possibility of being always represented by sites. So you see, these two crucial features are lost when you go from Grothendieck toposes to elementary toposes. Still, you can do some things. In particular, you keep the logical core of toposes, as incarnated by the subobject classifier. So, I mean, formally, an elementary topos is defined as a Cartesian closed category with finite limits and a subobject classifier. The subobject classifier is also called the object omega. And in fact, it is responsible for most of the logical behavior of a topos as a mathematical universe. So for those kind of considerations, as well as for the classification of higher order intuitionistic type theories of topological factors, elementary toposes can be useful and are indeed the right notion. Still, from the point of view of geometry and the connections to other areas of mathematics by using representations such as sites, in fact, elementary toposes are not at all comparable with Grothendieck toposes. So, in fact, to summarize the situation, we can say that most algebraic geometers after Grothendieck essentially abandoned the notion of topos by concentrating on the study of particular cohomological invariants associated with specific geometric sites. Probably, as we said, for the sake of pragmatism. We can sum up this attitude with the slogan sites without toposes. And in fact, this has been largely shared within this community. Nowadays, fortunately, there are very important exceptions to this. In particular, I would mention Peter Scholz and Dustin Clausen, who have made a crucial use of toposes in their refoundation of functional analysis. But all of this is very recent. And it is true that for many years, even after Grothendieck made this denunciation, the situation remained like this. On the other hand, as I anticipated, the choice of categorical logicians following Olivia and Tierney was on the other extreme to a certain extent, in the sense that they investigated the toposes without any reference to their presentations. So what they have done could be described by the slogan, toposes without sites. And there are various reasons behind this choice. In fact, in my opinion, this is based mostly on a bias existing in certain logical circles against both infinitary constructions. Think about the role that finitism has had in logic from the very beginning, and also against higher order constructions. Because you see, one feature that distinguishes elementary toposes from Grothendieck toposes is the fact that elementary toposes can be axiomatized in finitary first order logic, while the notion of Grothendieck topos cannot. In practice, it doesn't make any, it doesn't have any impact, but ideologically, it can make a difference for people who adhere to this conviction. So to illustrate this point of view of category theories, there is a dictum that has become quite popular in that community, which is that the topos is more important than the site. Something that, of course, I totally disagree with, because, as I have said, what is important to me is the interplay existing between the level of toposes, which incarnate invariance and unity, and the level of size, which incarnate diversity. And I think that the two levels should not at all be identified, and it doesn't make sense to me to say that one level is more important than the other. But this is actually the conviction that these people have had, and I don't think that they have actually changed their mind since they first presented this point of view. So you see here I have cited two references, the introduction of Johnston's book Topos Theory from 1977, and Ralph Kromer book Tool and Object, which presents these developments. So, so this sentence appears exactly in the two sources, and in fact, Johnston explicitly complains about the fact that the full import of the dictum that the topos is more important than the site seems never to have been appreciated by the Grothendieck school. So, in fact, you see, he really expresses disagreement with Grothendieck's conception of toposes. You see, he says, I do not view topos theory as a machine for the demolition of unsolved problems in algebraic geometry or anywhere else, unlike Grothendieck. And then he even goes beyond saying that by qualifying the existence theorem for classifying toposes as fundamentally useless. So, I mean, this is quite interesting. As I have said, I totally disagree with this, but it would be a matter for historians of mathematics and philosophers to think about why this kind of attitudes have been taken and how a certain kind of ideology can influence mathematical developments and so on. Because in fact, we can really see that inside this community, the study of classifying toposes was more or less abandoned. And it was mostly due to these positions. So concluding, I would say that we definitely need a two-level theory, which is something that has been missing in both schools, because you see both among geometers and among category theorists, what has been lacking is the integration between the concrete level of sites and more generally presentations of toposes and the abstract level of toposes and their invariants. So this duality, as I already anticipated, is at the very core of the theory of toposes and bridges, which can be described quite quickly without going in too many technical details. In fact, this perspective was first introduced in 2010, so more than 10 years ago. In the last years, many applications in different areas of mathematics have been obtained by using these techniques, which in fact have been proved useful not just for relating different theories to each other, but also for studying a given theory in a dynamical way by a multiplicity of points. Now, the idea of toposes as bridges is that of computing topos theoretic invariants in terms of different presentations of toposes. So if one has, for instance, two different theories which are classified by the same topos as depicted in this bridge, what one can do is to look at invariants defined on the common classifying topos and compute them in terms of the two theories separately. So suppose that one theory is written in algebraic language and the other one is written in analytic language. What you will get is a correspondence between an algebraic property and an analytic property, because all of these two properties will correspond to the same property lying at the topos level. So the unification is happening at the topos level, and it is induced by the invariant, but diversity is not eliminated, because diversity lies at the level of the different presentations and the different ways in which the given invariant manifests itself in terms of those presentations. So I would like just to briefly mention two examples of bridges. One is Galois theory. So Galois theory can be very effectively interpreted as a topos theoretic bridge. And in fact, you can go much beyond the Galois theory. You can develop a theory allowing you to generate Galois type theories in different fields of mathematics by using topos theory. So here is a theorem providing an equivalence of toposes, which is the starting point for applying the bridge technique. And by applying the bridge technique, you actually get a theory which extends Grothendieck's theory of Galois category, and which can be used for generating Galois type theories in different fields of mathematics where Grothendieck's formalism didn't apply. In particular, one can apply this theory to construct a Galois theory for finite groups and a Galois theory for finite graphs. And there is also an important link with the model theoretic treatment of Galois theory, which was the subject of the previous talk. So in fact, as is specified by the last paragraph here in the slides, there is a process within topos theory of completion by the addition of imaginaries that admits a completely categorical and geometric description, and which corresponds on the logical side, if we switch to a logical presentation of the topos, it corresponds precisely to the addition of the imaginaries in the sense of Shira. So of course, I don't have time to go more into this. Of course, if you want to learn about this theory, you can read my paper, Topological Galois Theory, from 2016. Then another nice example of a bridge is in connection with the stone type dualities, which can all be interpreted as arising from bridges of a certain kind. In fact, this approach has led not only to reinterpret all the classical stone type dualities, but to the introduction of infinitely many new ones. Okay, so quickly, a few words on future directions. I mean, this perspective of bridges now is well established in the sense that we have established so many applications in different areas that there is no doubt anymore about the effectiveness of this technique. So toposes, indeed, as Grothendieck predicted, can effectively act as unifying spaces in mathematics. So, but in order to benefit from all of this, it's important to further develop the theory at the general level, and also to try to apply it in specific mathematical context, both to reinterpret known results and to generate many new ones, as it has happened in the last. So that's the last slide with some references. Of course, there is Récolte des Semailles by Grothendieck that now, as I have said, is available thanks to Gallimard, a French editor who has published it. I hope that very soon there will be English translations as well. For the moment, there are only partial translations available online. Then, well, the contents of this talk are taken from a paper which is written in French. It's called La notion unificatrice de topos and is published in a book. It's the proceeding volume for the series of lectures, Lecture Grothendieckien, given at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. But an English translation will be available soon. So from my website, I will publish. And then if you are curious to see different applications of bridges that have been obtained so far, you can refer to my book, or even better, my habilitation thesis that really is written for a broad audience of mathematicians in different areas and makes a broad overview of applications of the bridge technique in different areas. So this is a 100 pages text that you can download from my website. Okay, so I thank you very much for your attention.